I'm Nicole Stevenson, Director of the SPW program, and on behalf of the entire Mainline Chamber staff, we'd like to thank you so much for your continued support and engagement. The Mainline Chamber has been hosting virtual meetings and events over the last 2 months to continue providing relevant and meaningful content to our community at this unprecedented time in our history. We believe it is more important now than ever to engage and provide these opportunities and services. We encourage you to please sign up for our SPW events at spwmainline.com and our chamber events like the Recovery Resources Live virtual events at mlcc.org. I'd like to encourage you to tag important moments of today's program and use the hashtag MLCC or hashtag SPWMainline to continue the dialogue and receive further feedback and information from today. I want to thank those of you who have attended our events and have taken the time to respond to our surveys following each event. We are still doing our surveys, so please make sure that you participate in those. Your feedback allows us to be responsive to the needs and preferences of the members. And in order to maintain our important networking component, which we're missing a little bit today, we're going to continue bringing people together by offering those of you that are attending a chance to review the attendee list and select an individual for an introduction to be invited to a 15-minute conversation with one another. And that list will be sent out to the email address you registered with at the close of the program today. We know that the continued support of our sponsors is the reason that we can provide these programs. So we want to thank each and every sponsors, most of which have been with us for years. And I'm going to share my screen now so that we can thank them appropriately. And here are our sponsors. So thank you all. I'm giving them a virtual clap. I'm gonna have to find that sound button on my computer one day. So we want to thank our sponsors for their support. We also want to highlight a local community nonprofit. We do that at each of our events. It's a very deep part of our SPW mission. So in recognition of Infertility Awareness Week, which started this week, and in connection to our program today, we'd like to highlight the March of Dimes, which is a nonprofit committed to ending prematurity, and it was adopted to address the growing crisis of premature birth in the United States and help families have full-term healthy babies. And you can learn more about their mission and donate to their cause at marchofdimes.org. Now, let's talk about our program today. It's not something that you typically hear about in a professional setting, but it can be the elephant in the room for many. Our esteemed speaker and panelists will cover the insidious signs of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, ways to advocate for yourself or for your loved ones about who you can be concerned about, establish expectations for treatments, and touch on why this specific topic feels so difficult to discuss. Families can struggle with the aspects of having a child at all different stages of their lives, feeling overwhelmed from the very beginning through the process and even long after. And it can cause individuals to feel out of control and helpless. The Postpartum Stress Center shares that finding the right tools for support can empower a family by providing information, understanding, and tools for intervention. And that is what we hope to provide you all with today. So please feel free to engage on the chat function if you know how to use that in Zoom, and submit your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom. And we will get to those questions in the last 15 minutes of the program today. I'd like to thank Hillary Waller, the LBC Director of Program and Psychotherapy at the Postpartum Stress Center, for joining us, Elizabeth Bland, which we'll call Liz, Division Director of Mainline Health Women's Emotional Wellness Center, and Rebecca Fox-Starr, an author and blogger at Mommy Ever After. Each of them will share more about themselves when it's their time to talk. But to begin, Liz actually offered to do a little breathing exercise today. So Liz, I will allow you to do that right now.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so honored to be here today. Excuse me. And wanted to start off with just a breathing exercise to help kind of ground us in the moment and bring us together as a group. And I would encourage you, if you'd like to participate, to close your eyes or to pick a spot on the floor. We are going to be doing what we call today a dragon breath. So anyone who has gone to a yoga class will be familiar. Essentially, before we get started, I will do one for us. So maybe don't close your eyes just yet. I'll do one for us, and then I'll lead us through a few together. So the idea is you want to sit upright if that's comfortable for you with your feet planted on the ground. I like to think of my body as a garden hose. And you know how the hose in the yard sometimes gets over itself and then the water just dribbles out. So I want to sit upright and tall so it's straight. So when I breathe in the air, it's going to go in from my head all the way down to my toes. And like I said, I'll do one for us now. So I'm going to breathe in through my nose. I'm going to fill my lungs with air, hold it at the top for a moment. And then here comes the dragon part. Open my mouth and push it right out as if I'm breathing fire out. So I'll show one to you. So if you're ready, we'll do 3 together, and I'll lead us through 2, and the last one we'll do on our own. But now's the time. You either want to pick the spot on the floor that you're comfortable looking at, or please close your eyes. And before we get rolling, I just want to really make sure that we give ourselves, if you will, a mental high five for being here today and making ourselves a priority and doing everything we had to do this morning so that we can carve out this time for ourselves. And we'll get started. So now together, we're going to breathe in through our nose, all the way, fill those lungs, hold it at the top, and then sigh it out loudly through your open mouth. Beautiful. Back in. Hold it at the top. Really loud. Let's push it out. And the last one at your own rate. Beautiful. In my office, we call that an oxygen cocktail. So I encourage you to take a cocktail throughout the day.
I like that. Thank you so much, Liz. So now we are going to get started with Hillary. Welcome, Hillary. Oh, she's not unmuted.
Okay, there I am.
There we go. There she is.
Okay, I'm going to figure out how to share my screen. For some reason, it's not working, even though we practiced. There we go. Okay. All right, tell me if this works. Good? Okay. So it's such a pleasure to be here. Excuse me. It's such a pleasure to be here today. And I am going to be the first today to admit that presenting virtually is really, really uncomfortable and different for me. I'm a person who interacts by profession, face-to-face, as a primary way to communicate. And so this is a new experience for me. So if this is a new experience for you, doing any sort of mindfulness, doing any sort of discussion about mental health, particularly in your own homes, it's an interesting experience to be focusing on our mental health in our own homes, especially if we're used to going to someone's office to do that. So there's a lot of opportunity to be uncomfortable right now. So I'm starting by disclosing my discomfort with the technology and the virtual medium and all of that. So we'll get that out of the way. So I'm here today to discuss the importance of maternal mental health, and we can also refer to the importance of parental mental health, because coffee is not the answer, although many of us think that it is, including sometimes myself. It's important to be able to recognize that only to some extent do the things that we do to keep up with the rat race really work. Sometimes it feels better to wake up in the morning and have a cup of coffee and maybe 10 or 12 more throughout the day, but ultimately we can't survive like that. We can't healthily maintain our mental health in that state where we're sort of running and running and running all the time. So hopefully at the end of my talk today, you'll have some tools to add to your toolbox and some insight into how we as therapists recommend that women, parents, are able to tolerate a lot of the distress that we feel in our everyday lives while maintaining so much responsibility. So starting with a few questions that the panelists discussed that come up commonly among the people that we talk with. So is it normal to feel this exhausted? I'm failing a little bit at everything. Especially now, I'm hearing that. I'm failing a little bit at everything. I'm working at home, my children are home, we're homeschooling, etc. How am I supposed to find time at work to pump? Do we even have a pumping room? I can't answer emails 24/7. There's no way I'll continue to advance feeling so distracted. This is really, really hard for me. It must be hard for my partner too, but I don't know if I have the bandwidth to care right now. How could I ever explain how complicated it is to deal with my special circumstances? Maybe some of you are parents to children who've graduated from the NICU experience. Maybe you've experienced a miscarriage. We know of women who experience miscarriages while at work without taking time off. Maybe you've experienced a pregnancy or postpartum loss, fertility treatments, adoptions, coping with the complications of having a partner who is depressed. So how do I handle that in the workplace? Do I disclose to my coworkers? Should I disclose to my coworkers? What do I say to get the support that I need? We spend a tremendous amount of our time at work, involved in work, thinking about work, mentally at work when we're physically not at work. We spend a tremendous amount of time and energy in these environments. And so it's so important to be able to learn how to create not only work-life balance that's related to scheduling, but also to sort of psychological self-care. So again, I hope that that's what we'll be able to learn a little more about today. So that first question, is it normal to feel this exhausted? That comes up a lot. Is it normal? Is it normal? And people know, we all know that parents are tired. Parents are stressed. That is a rule. Parents are tired and stressed. And sometimes parents cry, and often parents feel anxious. But there is a way to begin to distinguish between, is it normal to feel this exhausted and is it not normal? But I want to start with just sort of normalizing a bit. So this illustration comes from our director, Karen Kleiman's book, Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts. It's my personal favorite because the idea of sort of being in a yoga class where I'm doing my self-care, when I think about self-care, I often will think I have to go to yoga, I have to get my nails done, I do the things that actually add a to-do item to my plate. And so when I think about myself being in this class and sort of feeling kind of overwhelmed by the fact that I've had to actually create new space and time to do this, I love this illustration because it speaks to how similar the experience is for many in the room. So you see 4 women in their yoga practices, different shapes, different sizes, different bodies, etc., all thinking the same thing. I'm totally out of shape and gross. I'm so tired. I have no idea what I'm doing as a mother. What if this was a terrible mistake? Everyone else seems so calm and confident. I'm the only one who really feels this way. What if I told someone how I really feel and the thoughts that I'm having? OMG, they would think I was a terrible mother. Would they take my baby away? I can hardly move. Maybe I'm too tired to exercise. What am I doing? The what am I doing is what really strikes me most about the thought bubble, because that question comes up as a working, busy mom for me all the time. What am I doing? Am I making the right choices? Am I parenting the right way? And I find it helpful to recognize that when asked, does everybody feel this way? My answer is yes. Everybody has some of these feelings. Everyone shares this experience of self-doubt. But we need to also differentiate between when is it normal to feel this exhausted and when is it actually too much. So I'll use the term, and the term perinatal mood or anxiety disorder will likely come up today. So 1 in 7 women will experience a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, mood or anxiety disorder. And it's important to note that 1 in 7 means, think about the number of women, parents, who come into your office space that you interact with in the course of a day. 1 in 7 of those people will have symptoms so severe that they meet criteria for major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, a bipolar disorder, some sort of mental health set of circumstances, set of symptoms that is highly enough disruptive to their everyday routines, including their everyday routines at work, to be labeled a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. And the reason it's important to note this is because women, families feel a tremendous amount of shame, and there's a tremendous amount of stigma still around the idea that someone might have a mental health disorder or a mental health challenge. And so it's really important to notice, even in this very specific population, 1 in 7 is a very high number. Sometimes you see 1 in 5, sometimes we see 1 in 10. 1 in 7 is typically the number that our practice uses. So because today our angle isn't really to dive into each of the different mood and anxiety disorders in detail, I'll sort of leave it at that to illustrate how common. It's not an uncommon experience for women to experience depression or anxiety symptoms or symptoms of a more complex mood or anxiety disorder after giving birth. And when we think about the perinatal period, we sometimes misunderstand what it actually means to be postpartum. Lots of the women that I work with think that postpartum means like right after you have the baby until you can start to like go out and do stuff again. And as soon as you start to think, oh, I feel more like myself, I'm not postpartum anymore. So it's important to also notice that the postpartum period or the perinatal period captures the time that we get pregnant through the time of delivery, and then for the first 12 months after giving birth. I also, as a clinician, argue that I would say for the first 2 years, we can see the onset of these kinds of mood and anxiety issues related to becoming a parent. Because when you think about what's happening in the first 2 years of your child's life or in your life as a parent, how many things do we have to adjust to in those 2 years? How many different little adjustments do our children make? How many adjustments have to happen in our lives? The difference between parenting an infant and a toddler is extreme. And on top of that, how many families will have a second child within those first 2 years? So do not underestimate the complicated nature of being postpartum or perinatal twice in the same time period. Women have overlapping perinatal periods. And so as this applies to the workplace, be mindful of the fact that when women are in these sort of families or in these reproductive years, these kinds of things are going on under the surface, sort of in the cloud around the family all the time. So while it's normal for all parents to experience some level of distraction, some level of exhaustion, some level of tearfulness, some scary thoughts, what if this happens to my family? What if this happens to my child? We all experience adjustments. 1 in 7 women will experience these symptoms with such intensity that it is truly disruptive to their days. And while we can point to a certain number of biological factors, genetic factors, environmental factors that we know increase the likelihood that this will happen to a person, we can't always predict and we can't always prevent. There is a lot that we can do in terms of lifestyle to protect mothers from experiencing these symptoms or the intensity of these symptoms. So we'll start with a couple of sort of self-help skills. So to the question, I'm failing a little, or the idea, I'm failing a little bit at everything. When I talk with my clients about this idea of failure, and I encourage those of you who are listening, who are experiencing this literally right now, you've got maybe kids in the next room trying to do something for their schools, you have work going on, you're on your lunch break right now, only sort of focused on this webinar that you were intending to really focus fully on. I'm a little bit failing at everything. So I encourage mothers to think about their rubric. So what is your rubric? First of all, who's writing your report card? And second, what goes on that report card? So I leave this blank for you to really sort of think for a second about what kinds of measures are you using when you think about housekeeping, when you think about professional productivity, when you think about relationships and self-care. Housekeeping, I repeated accidentally, I'm sorry, that should say your marriage. Pandemic, I added as well, just because of our current circumstances to remain relevant. So what is on your rubric? Does your rubric include things like, I did the dishes every single day, the sink was always clean? Does your rubric include, my children never experience sadness or fear? Does your rubric include, everybody's needs are instantaneously met? And if it does, I encourage you to think about what are the actual needs of your family. Do your children need to be rigidly adhering to a routine for homeschooling more than they need to be feeling loved and stable just by parents who are doing the best that they can? And I could talk for hours and hours and hours about the importance of doing our best as parents, and hours and hours and hours on what children actually need, which is a loving, supportive environment, as opposed to any of the many, many, many things that we try to check off of a list every day. So I encourage, when you think, I'm failing a little bit at everything, think about what's your rubric. What are the things that you're failing at, and to what extent are you actually failing versus struggling? It's okay for there to be a struggle. Life is about struggle. We teach our children they need to struggle. When we teach them to walk, they get up and they fall and they do it a million times. And at some point, our culture takes away our resilience. So I'm failing a little bit at everything. I encourage you to flip it over on its head and think about, what are you succeeding at a little bit every day? How am I supposed to find time at work to pump? Do we even have a pumping room? So establishing expectations is the tip here. I will share a personal story. Early on, when I had my first daughter, I have 2 daughters, 9 and 4. When I had my first child, everything was very, very new. I wasn't experienced working in this field yet. And it was very hard for me to advocate for what I needed as a new mom. So something like I need privacy to breastfeed my baby in those early days of infancy was very hard for me to say out loud. And I learned an important lesson. I learned that the way to ask for the things that you need is to ask for the things that you need and to feel entitled to ask for the things that you need. We may not have every single need met in exactly the way that we want them to be met. But when I work with women who will ask, well, how do I fit pumping into my work schedule? I work a very busy, long day. I'm needed at my place of work. I want to illustrate how needed I am in my place of work. How do I ask for that? We practice saying, after my maternity leave, I will need time to pump breast milk for my newborn. My plans are to fill in your blank, and I will need these accommodations. And so for the employers listening, how to answer is absolutely. Absolutely. Let's discuss how we can meet those needs and ensure that you have support to succeed at your work too. Because what we know about parents in the workplace is that culturally, we are underserving the needs of parents. And because we don't have a perfect solution to that problem right now, it's incumbent upon us to do the best that we can to accommodate to the best of our ability. What I find with mothers who are able to walk into their supervisors' offices and to state their needs clearly, when they receive an answer like, absolutely, let's figure out how to work this out, she sees more ability to be flexible. So that even if the employer can't accommodate every single request, she begins to feel that there's a collaborative relationship. So on both ends, we can do things to improve how the system is working within the workplace. Boundaries. This is one that really gets me. I can't answer 24/7 emails anymore. How will I ever advance? So many women who come into my office really struggle with setting boundaries at work. And we kind of move around our lives thinking that if we're setting up boundaries, we're pushing people away. Or if we were to establish a period of time, for example, in our day where we say, actually, I'm turning my phone, my computer, all of the technology is being turned off from work access for between the hours of 5 and 8, we feel like that creates a liability. We feel like we're not entitled to that space and time. So I turn to Brené Brown and give the quote, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. So it's a wonderful quotation. I love it. I live by it. I use it. I see Liz loves it too. But I think that quotations like that, without having the time and space to read and watch all of Brené Brown's amazing work, I kind of cut it into cliff notes. So how do we actually implement this? Notice your triggers. How do we know when we need to create a boundary? Boundaries aren't black and white. They're not intended to be like walls that we drop in our lives. They're intended to protect us and to protect others from our stressed out behavior. So when we start to feel overwhelmed, when we start to feel urgent or panicked, I notice those as my triggers. Many people will identify those as their triggers. I feel overwhelmed, often is I need to create a boundary here. So when you notice those triggers, figure out where you can create a boundary. Well, I'm feeling really overwhelmed at work. I have a meeting at 2 o'clock and I absolutely have to leave today at 4:30, but I think I can probably take a 15-minute walk for lunch. Now, when we identify where that boundary is, we recognize, well, I might disappoint others because I was supposed to have lunch with so-and-so, or my boss was expecting me to come in for this particular meeting, or I really shouldn't leave my desk today because I have 15 emails that have to be answered. So in those ways, we might risk disappointing others. And for so many people, even the thought of letting someone down is so intolerable that we choose to instead sit at our desks and try to continue to tolerate the overwhelmed feeling. So I'm advocating for learning distress tolerance skills, which are so useful in so many areas of coping with stress and mental health. But being able to tolerate disappointing others is both a critical workplace skill and also a home place skill. So when I'm sitting here on this webinar, which I am happy to be doing, I recognize that my kids are on their own homeschooling themselves. So they might not love that I'm here. I'm okay with that, because I practice tolerating that sort of low level. I know that it's not their favorite. I know they might be mad, but I can cope with the fact that everyone's not getting their needs exactly met in exactly the way that they want, because I practice it, not because it comes so naturally. This must be hard for my partner too, but I don't have the bandwidth to care. Another common question, another common complaint. We are just not on the same page. Oh, I don't know why I have that Apple symbol there. I apologize. You share this cartoon, which also comes from the book Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts, because it illustrates so nicely a very common dynamic. And in this particular set of circumstances, mom is asking dad for help. Dad's on dad's phone, and what you can't see because of my little icon there is that dad is answering a work email, which is important, and mom is feeling fully abandoned. Now, you can swap in dad holding the baby in this image. You can put mom on the couch. You can have two moms, two dads. Any sort of combination of parents or support system works here, because we're not always in the same place when it comes to what our emotional and physical needs are. So yes, I promise you that if you are struggling, it is hard for your partner too. And I know that we'll cover more of that when we talk as a panel later. Partners suffer when their partners are struggling. And it's because they're concerned. It's because they want to fix. It's because it's complicated when the person who's the rock can't be the rock anymore. It's complicated when you need to be the rock all the time. But I don't have the bandwidth to care. And I bring up this point, and I wanted to address this point, to both normalize that experience. It's really, really, really hard to have the bandwidth to care for another adult's emotional state when you're trying to care for your own and also your children's as a very high priority. And children might be your infant who has so many physical and emotional needs that it is truly overwhelming, or your 15-year-old or your 16-year-old or your 9-year-old. All of our children, while they're living in our homes and after they're done living in our homes, have intense emotional needs for us to fulfill as parents, and it's our responsibility to do so. At the same time, I use the oxygen mask analogy, where when you're flying on an airplane, you need to put on your oxygen mask first before you help others. And I use that here because it's so important to remember that your partner is your partner in parenting, your partner in collaborating, your partner in achieving self-care. So if your partner is struggling, it is important to create space for that person too. It's important to be able to sit with that person and recognize we are both having a hard time here. So what do we have left at the bottom of our cups to be able to give to each other? And in terms of finding just like an easy takeaway tip for this, I really, really like to encourage couples, even when they're angry at each other, even when they're irritable and feeling urgent and both struggling and suffering, maybe angry at each other because of the mood or anxiety disorder that's happening. I always encourage couples to develop some sort of an intimacy routine. And by that, I mean, find 5 minutes a day to sit on a couch next to each other and hold hands. Give each other a hug before you leave the house every day, a real hug, one that lasts more than like a second and one that's not for show to your children. Find a way to connect in some intimate way, emotionally intimate. It doesn't need to be physically intimate, where you're able to recognize we are in this together. And even if we are not feeling emotionally like each other's rock, we're in this boat together and we're working together. We're collaborating with each other. How do I explain my circumstances? Sorry, I was seeing that there were chats coming up and I wasn't sure if they were for me. How can I explain my circumstances? Should I or can I? So there are so many different complications. And again, we do trainings that go on hours and hours and hours and days individually on each one of these complications. But the ones that are kind of most common that I see most often in my practice would be families that experience NICU time or preterm labors that require bed rest followed maybe by NICU time, miscarriage and perinatal losses, so meaning the loss of a pregnancy, the death of an infant or a young child, families experiencing fertility treatments, which are incredibly time consuming and disruptive to the daily work routine in immense ways, the adoption process. And also referencing the last slide, when partners are depressed. So when one partner is depressed, it is hard for the other partner to function at work. The other partner may need to attend to the depressed partner's need. So how do we explain these circumstances and create boundaries at work? Because unless you have some insight into what this is like, it can be very hard to relate. And when you are the parent who's experiencing, for example, a loss, it's very, very difficult to walk into any environment, even your own mother's environment, and say, this is what my needs are at this time, because you're feeling vulnerable. You don't know whether the other person speaks the language that you need him or her to speak in order to be able to provide you with the kinds of emotional support that you need. And also because the questions culturally about what are the logistics of handling these things as parents. Again, we are not a society that tends to be really friendly and well-resourced for people experiencing mental health challenges or parenting challenges. So if I am an employee who needs to go for fertility treatments and I need to be at the infertility specialist's office 3 mornings a week for testing at 8 o'clock, that's unbelievably disruptive to a work routine. If I'm a mother who begins preterm labor and I don't have ample maternity leave, how can I be out of the office during the period of time when I'm on bed rest, and during the period of time when my child's in the NICU, and during the period of time when I need to welcome this child home to my house? So there are so many layers and layers and layers of complication and overwhelm. And again, my guidance to families that are confronting these circumstances is to come up with some elevator speech that lets you advocate specifically for what you need. How can you capture in just a couple of sentences enough of what's going on that you're able to state, this is what's happening and this is what I need, clearly enough that you can engage in a professional conversation about the kinds of accommodations that can be helpful to you. Again, we can't, as employers, always meet every need. We may not be able to do to fulfill every need perfectly, even if as human beings, we want to be able to do that. So I raise these particular points because recognizing that these are circumstances that your employees and your colleagues are experiencing right now. I guarantee you there are people in this webinar at this moment experiencing any one of, or a combination of these factors. Raising awareness that there's a space in the workplace to discuss this within boundaries and parameters that are appropriate. That's why elevator speeches are important. It helps us to deliver a piece of information with less emotion than we would say with our therapist or with our best friend or with our doctor. But we're able in the workplace to say, if your family is experiencing a NICU stay, we will do the best that we can to accommodate an extended period of leave. We will do the best that we can to help you work with HR so that we can help you to get the paperwork in order. So there are ways that we can behave as humans, even within the context of very stressful, very rigorous work environments. So in wrapping up, I wanted to cover the idea of the masquerade. So the idea of the masquerade is one that we rely on really heavily at the Postpartum Stress Center. We recognize that human beings, particularly women, and particularly postpartum women, are very good at wearing masks. We work very hard to present ourselves in the world in a way that helps people to view us as having certain qualities. And in working with mothers, the idea of the supermom, the idea of the superwoman, the idea of the mom who can sort of do it all, manage it all, protect everyone, and sacrifice herself, there's great value placed on that mask. And so what we see in our offices is very often women will come into our office, we'll meet someone new, we'll go out into the waiting room, and we'll find someone who does not look like a person that you would think is depressed. She's beautifully dressed, she's attentive to her baby is happy and cooing. The picture itself is idyllic and beautiful and put together. And I always wonder when I see those parents, what must it be like for you to present that way? You came to your therapist's office. What kind of effort goes into your presentation? And why is it so important? Why does it feel so important to present with a mask that allows me to think at first impression that you've got everything under control? So be mindful in your personal life, in your professional life, in your friendships, that when you ask a mother or a parent, how are you doing today? How's it going? The answer you receive automatically may not always fit or capture, is unlikely to fit or capture what truly is happening under the surface. And depending on your context, it may not always be possible or appropriate to dive under the surface a little bit, but recognizing that just because everything looks okay may not indicate that everything is okay. And so that person that you're connecting with in that moment on a professional level or a personal level may have so much more going on underneath the surface that she's working to deal with in her personal life, in his personal life. And so in the workplace where we do maintain boundaries, where we do maintain a certain professional mask, it's more important even to recognize you are less likely to find out when someone is struggling. And so when you start to see that there are signs of this person may need more logistical support, may need more work support, we advocate for offering that to the best of our abilities. We really, really hope that, again, I use the word humans a lot because this feels to me like good human values. As human beings, we try to increase our sensitivity to each other's humanity. And so particularly during these times, and this is so timely to be having a conversation about tolerance for chaos, tolerance for ups and downs of moods and lifestyle. I really encourage every single one of us, and I include myself, to be mindful of how much we need each other to be able to be flexible, to be able to be filled with our own self-efficacy, to be filling ourselves with self-esteem and self-confidence. Because when we feel that other people have confidence in us, we are better positioned to feel confident ourselves and are better able to complete the many, 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 many tasks that we're responsible for every day. So with that, I'm really excited that I'll be able to moderate the discussion now that we're about to move into. So I thank you all so much for your time and for your attention. And I do hope that you've taken away a few little tips from this little speech that will help you move through your days. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hillary. While you're getting out of the screen, I would like to have Liz and Rebecca, and of course yourself, while you're preparing the questions. I'd like you all to maybe introduce yourself and explain your role and why this topic is important to you and some of the questions that you're interested the most in getting to today. Let's start with you, Liz.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Hillary. That was terrific. My name is Liz Bland. As Nicole shared, I am the division director at the Mainline Health Women's Emotional Wellness Center, which is a program that I launched with the health system and our incredible medical director, Dr. Linda Ryan, who's on. So hi, Dr. Ryan. In 2013, we provide outpatient behavioral health care to women. We specialize in the perinatal period. I am a licensed clinical social worker by training. I've been with Mainline Health for almost 14 years and started the first 7 as a social worker in the NICU, labor and delivery and maternity. I identify as a mindfulness-based CBT therapist, big mouthful, right? I think we're going to talk a little bit more about what mindfulness is as a therapeutic coping technique in a bit. And I think a big part of my job, but also who just I identify as a human, to Hillary's point, is being involved in discussions that are so important like this one, honest discussions with women and men, and sharing our truths. So thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Liz. Really appreciate it. Let's go to Rebecca now, please.
Hi, sorry about that. I'm Rebecca Fox-Starr. I am the survivor of severe prenatal and postpartum anxiety and depression that I suffered from after the birth of my second child in 2013. So I became a mom in 2010, and I had typical baby blues. Didn't advance to what Hillary discussed in terms of true diagnosable perinatal distress, but after having my son in 2013, I was diagnosed with severe postpartum depression, and subsequently have written 2 books on the subject, Beyond the Baby Blues, Anxiety and Depression During and After Pregnancy, which is my own story as well as actionable advice. And then most recently, I came out with my second book, Baby Ever After, Expanding Your Family After Postpartum Depression, because I found there was a real void in the market for things about, can you have a baby after suffering like I had? Can you expand your family, and how? Adoption, surrogacy, biological expansion, going through fertility treatments, and then the very valid choice to not expand your family. And then finally, I have a third book, which is a children's picture book coming out in almost exactly a year. And I'm very honored because it happens to be the same publisher that published Karen Kleiman's Good Mom Says Scary Thoughts, which is a fantastic book. I highly, highly recommend it. And that will be, I can't share the title yet, but it's Normalizing Feelings for Children, because we are all here because it's, as Hillary said so eloquently, mental health issues are still a little bit taboo. They're hard to understand, especially in this context. So I'm optimistic that for our children, we can fortify them and feel, promote confidence in their own voices so they can speak about how they're feeling physically and emotionally. So I'm happy to be here and honored to be here.
Thank you, Rebecca, so much. Okay, Hillary, I will allow you to yourself and then away.
I think okay, that's good. I'm Hillary. I've spoken at you a whole bunch already. So I am the director of programming at the Postpartum Stress Center. I'm also a therapist there. So I maintain a clinical practice where I work with primarily what I refer to as perinatal families. So my perspective on what I get to do is working with families who are considering becoming pregnant all the way through deciding when to be done having children, and everything in between. I have a particular, it's a funny thing to say when you're a therapist that you really sort of like to work with grief, but I have a particular affinity to families that are dealing with unforeseen circumstances. So different kinds of medical complications in mom and baby, different kinds of challenges becoming pregnant, adoptions, infertility, that sort of thing. So those are topics that really pull closely to my clinical heartstrings. And it is such an honor to be here today. I love working with both Liz and Becca. It's really fun to be able to see you both on my screen right now. So thanks for having us.
Okay, well, we will get started now on the moderating portion of the program and the panel portion of our program, where Hillary will ask some questions for both Becca and Liz, and then we will get to the Q&A in about another 25 minutes or so. So Hillary, do you want to get us started with the first question?
Sure. So we did a little bit of mindfulness practice, and Liz, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what is therapeutic mindfulness and how it can help with stress, anxiety, and depression.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And as you shared, Hillary, I want to share too that I am not the best with technology. So I'm going to try my best. I do have some notes too, because as I was formulating my thoughts, thinking I wanted to hit some points to share with you all. So thank you for asking. The concept of mindfulness is not a new one. The Buddhists, for instance, have been practicing mindfulness for hundreds and hundreds of centuries. And I want to be very clear that when we're talking about mindfulness in this arena, we're not talking about a religion. We're talking about a therapeutic coping technique. So most simply put, mindfulness is paying attention to our thoughts and our emotions in the moment, in the present moment, without getting carried away by them. Sounds easy, right? If we think about it, this really applies to stress, anxiety, and depression in the following way. So if you think about anxiety as a picture, pictorially, it typically looks like a spiral. So typically one thought, I can have one thought, and then if I'm feeling anxious, that thought may spiral and keep going and going. So for instance, as a benign example, if I were leaving where I am right now after our meeting today, our discussion, and I'm gonna jump in my car and drive to my office, maybe that's the thought. But if I'm feeling anxious, that may start to go very quickly into that spiral. So I may think about how, I actually had checked the weather before. This is not true, but I checked the weather, I thought it was gonna rain. And maybe, I started thinking about how I hate driving in the rain, and I have to go on the blue route, and we know the traffic, the drivers on the blue route. And, if I get, I don't like driving in the rain, what if I get into a car accident? And if I get into a car accident, my gosh, what hospital are they going to take me to? And who's going to call my house? And will my kids answer? And I mean, I'm feeling anxious now. I don't know about you, but I feel my own heart rate start to go right now. Depression, by the way, is often a spiral the other way into the past. So maybe I'm thinking about an argument I had with my sister, and I'm going through, she said this to me and that made me so angry. And she's always saying those things. And my parents have always sided with her. And now I'm going right back to memories I may have about that instance in the past. So the idea of mindfulness is to catch when we're in one of those spirals, and to face it head on, and to recognize that, and to cut it off, and to literally say to ourselves, you know, this is the spiral. I'm feeling anxious. To cut it off and to bring our focus and attention back to the present moment. And then once we're here, it doesn't stop there. Once we're here in the present moment, to ask ourselves 2 questions. What do I feel? And what do I need? And then take the steps to go get those things. So now suddenly we're not following the spiral either way, and kind of into our thoughts where we can go. We're bringing it back. We're focusing on the present, and we're identifying what we need, which can feel very different than following that spiral. I do want to mention too, mindfulness as a coping technique. Humans, we're mentioning humans. Humans tend to do very well with it, women especially. It's something that is very different than avoiding. And if it's okay, we can talk about that for a minute. Sometimes I'll have women who share with me, yeah, I just try to avoid. I feel anxious, I try to avoid it. I'm gonna go for a run. The problem with our brains though, is that when we go for a run, typically the anxiety comes with us, or it's waiting for us when we return. And this is simply because of the way our brains work. So I can see you beautiful ladies right now. If I tell you, for instance, that behind you, just behind you, don't look, just behind you though, I see the most beautiful rainbow. It's soaring through your windows. I see the colors shimmering, you know, the reds and the yellows and greens. It's just beautiful. What do you want to do more than anything right now? You want to turn around and look, right? I want to look, and I'm the one talking about it. That's simply the way our brains work. So with mindfulness, we're not avoiding, we're actually recognizing when we're in that spiral of anxiety or depression, facing it head on and addressing it. And for many, many women, this is a new concept in that they have been avoiding, and now facing head on, it's an empowering technique. Suddenly now, depression and anxiety don't get to control me, I get to control them.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm wondering, I love what you said about it doesn't control me, I control it. And actually, I love what you said about the oxygen cocktail at the very beginning, because lots of times I find that people hear the word mindfulness and think that they have to do like a practice, or they need to be every day for lots of minutes, maybe an app, maybe in the woods, whatever. And I remind my clients, like, the reality is not a lot of us have time for that unless we're truly motivated to do that. And so one deep breath. Like one deep breath is all you need to take yourself from a panic state down just a notch to be able to then function a little bit better. But Becca, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how, like in real life, as a mom, as someone who's experiencing symptoms, if you can talk about how some of these strategies apply and what it felt like for you and feels like for you to practice them.
Sure. So in terms of feeling these feelings when I was in an acute episode of distress, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, the things that I felt with postpartum depression and anxiety were very similar to general anxiety and depression. They just occurred during the postpartum period. So these are things that apply now to me as well. I'm very glad to say that I'm no longer depressed, but I'm definitely anxious, and this situation certainly compounds that for almost everyone that I know. And so I think that having in my arsenal a list of coping strategies that worked for me, and I think that that's the really important thing, because I can say, you know, Liz mentioned going for a run. I'm never going to do that. I've never run, never will. So that's a great thing theoretically. I hear exercise is good for endorphins, but it's not going to be the thing that helps me. I know that for me, and this is something that's been pretty universal, just like Hillary just said, getting a breath of fresh air. Even if it's a rainy day, if I open the door, especially right now, take a deep breath, it really almost instantly changes my mood and just shifts things. I'm getting different sensations. I think there's a brain stuff going on as a layperson, I'll just say it like that. And that's something that I know will help me. I know that making sure, and I'll go into this further in a little bit, but making sure that I'm taking care of my needs with my personalized specific list. And for me, even writing those things down, sharing it with my partner, sharing it with whoever I'm going to be spending time with, and saying, remind me to do this. remind me, or I'm going to need to take a half an hour and go out to the garden, because for me, the garden is my happy place. And that's where I will be able to be with my thoughts, not avoid them, but quiet my mind in a little bit in a small but profound way. So it can be very hard when you're in that moment, especially when you're really in that red zone of feeling. But if you have these really important coping skills in your back pocket, that for me, practicing them when I am not in the red zone, practicing these skills when I am having a day like today where I'm happy and content and fine, makes it so much easier when I'm in a more distressed place, because I have that muscle memory. I've flexed that muscle and I'm ready to take things on when it is a little bit more difficult.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, you mentioned talking to your partner, and we talked a little bit about that. I talked a little bit about that earlier. Becca, in your work, you've written a lot about the experience of sharing your story with others, including your partner. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like tips that you have for people who are struggling and need to express that.
I think it's crucial. Support is so key. Ideally, being supported by the person you're spending the most time with. So for a lot of people, it's who you're living with, who you're in this moment quarantined with. It's just so crucial. I will tell you that I don't remember everything extremely clearly from my immediate postpartum period. It's blurry and it's hazy, but I do remember so keenly when my husband Kenny came over to me 10 days after my son was born, and he said, "Are you okay? I see the light going out in your eyes." Now, I was lucky because he was very perceptive in that way and knew me well. But he gave me an opening, and I just remember the relief that I felt. Just this intense sense of relief. Like, I don't need to hide this anymore. So finding a way, I was lucky because he gave me an opening. Finding a way to convey how you're feeling is going to look different for many people and for most people. I'm a very open person. Kenny and I talk very openly about our feelings. We communicate really well verbally. But what I've learned is every relationship style is different. So I think that being really specific in terms of feelings and needs can be very helpful. Making a list, writing something down. This is how I'm feeling. Sharing links, sharing things to read, sharing insight. Maybe it's harder for me to articulate it, especially if I'm in a rough place. And if I just say, it's not in a passive aggressive way, but I'm not like leaving a newspaper out and saying like, here, read this, like, or just leaving it there. But I can't really explain this, but I want you to know how I feel. So somebody else said it for me, but it could have been me. And then I think Hillary's advice to find moments of intimacy and connection is extremely important, whatever that looks like. Maybe intimacy is sitting next to the person watching Netflix, and that feels really close and connected. Making a reminder in your phone to hug for 30 seconds, putting it in there every day at a time you'll be together. And even when you don't want to, even when you don't like each other, which happens, making sure there's something that happens when you are physically touching the person that you are committed to, or if you feel like is your partner. It makes that person feel like a partner. And finally, I got really good advice because my husband and I went to couples therapy after all of this. We were both broken in many ways, and we leaned on each other, and it really changed the dynamic in our marriage. So one of the things that I learned, and that was very helpful for us, is take 20 minutes or a half an hour at the end of the day or at a time that's really more convenient, and just give each other the space to vent. I think we have a lot of preconceived notions about what our partner understands or can handle, or their emotional capacity. So for me, just saying, I need you to listen. I need you to hear me. Don't say anything. I don't want you to problem solve. I don't need your advice. I just need you to know how I feel, and I need to know that you know this. And I've given that advice, honestly, very, very recently to some people close to me, and it's been tremendously helpful. The expectations were low, but the rewards were high.
I get that advice all the time too. I live by it also.
Yeah. I think so. That's so important too, Becca, what you shared. Absolutely. And, I want to share too that often when I'm talking to women, or my experience has been, and women have taught me that, sometimes evaluating, when we can identify what we feel and what we need, sometimes it's that we don't then ask for it. And sometimes we can act as our own roadblocks to telling ourselves things that are not helpful, right? So, you know, my partner's too busy. I should be able to do this on my own. That's a big one. These harsh things that we're telling ourselves. So it's sometimes working through that, and we all need to ask for help at times. And that, you know, as a woman, I can do everything. It's just not good for me to do everything. Yeah, on my own.
Just because I can doesn't mean I should, right? So I think, Liz, I'd love to sort of turn to you and ask as sort of like an employer supervisor role. What would your advice be to others who are sort of managing a group like you do, right? Where you're having experiences with people that are working for you, with you. Can you speak to asking for those needs to be met in a professional atmosphere? How can a person who needs the support ask a supervisor or a colleague?
Yeah, you know, and Hillary, you touched upon this too so beautifully, I thought, in your presentation. And I think, you know, for me, it comes back to, again, that human element that, you know, when we're at work, and yes, there's a hierarchy and there's, you know, all different roles and folks working together, but we're human first. And relating to each other, and going back to that piece that I was speaking of, those, you know, so many women have said the things that we're talking about, not knowing even how to bring up those needs. So to use that format, if that's comfortable for them, I feel overwhelmed. I need to take some time off. And again, meeting each other where we are and truly listening, right? Because there's a different way to listen. We could, you know, I think it's a difference between reacting and responding. And again, using those mindfulness skills, because as a supervisor, if I'm in, you know, meeting with someone who I work with, if my mind is racing and all the other things I have to do that day, and also, you know, pick up my kids and get this report done, and I'm not being present. So making sure that as leaders too, we are adhering to some of these tools that we're encouraging other women to adhere to as well.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about, I'm also just sort of checking the notes that I have for today. Let's talk a little bit about self-care. And I want to sort of throw this question out for all of us, because I think that, you know, I mentioned this earlier, but lots of times when I ask people about like a self-care plan, the answers include things like physical maintenance or exercise. And we tend to sort of view those as two really important categories for self-care. And I find that I'm having the conversation with women more and more and more who are newly postpartum, and who are in, particularly the newly postpartum group, and who are in the group of parents who are sort of like, well, now my children have 8 million activities and I can't get anywhere because I have 3 kids, 2 adults, and not enough cars to drive all the different ways. And particularly now, given the pandemic, I'm experiencing myself and with others a lot, like, how do we don't have access to the skills that we used to, the places we used to go to cope. So what skills do we need in order to be able to internally find better self-care and more sort of peace inside? So I'd love to sort of throw that out to both of you and just sort of hear what you advise, how you experience, et cetera.
Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is to put ourselves on that to-do list. Because I don't know any woman who doesn't have a huge list of things to get done. And you know, now too, that so many of us are in our homes, I have to watch myself how often I will want to, you know, at the same time, work, do this, do that, and then also let me throw in the laundry, and I'll come back and, whew, you know, can get overwhelmed so quickly. But I would like us to talk about and think about putting our own needs on that list. And that oxygen mask, Hillary, you talked about, that's an image we talk about often too. You know, it is, no one's going to put us on our own to-do list but us. And that being said, so for me, you were mentioning the meditation piece and not needing sort of all the hoopla, and I absolutely agree. I've had so many women say, oh, Liz, this breathing part of mindfulness, I want no part of it. I know I'm not doing candles, altar, and I'll say, whoa, 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 absolutely not. For me, the meditation piece is simply the breath. And, you know, as our bodies, if we're feeling anxious, that's our fight or flight response. And we all possess the ability to use our breath because it calms ourselves. So anytime, in my opinion, you take a purposeful breath for the intention of calming ourselves, that's meditation. Takes the pressure off, the breathing piece.
Thank you. Becca, do you want to share? I just saw you mute yourself. That's why I'm hesitating.
I do. I'm sorry. I have a phone ringing in the background. Like, this is very real life, but it should be ending in just a second. Super quickly, I think that identifying those little things, like we said before, I think that's excellent advice, Liz. Really excellent. And honestly, something that I'm going to take today away from this amazing presentation and meeting. I really am going to employ that and remind myself, because again, I'm not an expert here. I'm just somebody who's been through this and then learned as much as I can. But it's my belief that we also, in terms of adding ourselves to the list, we need to give ourselves the opportunity to succeed. For me, that means proper sleep, proper nutrition. And I think that's probably for most people. And if you just do those basic things and meet your own basic needs, which you'd be so surprised at how many women don't give themselves the time to meet their own most fundamental needs. If I haven't slept or am hangry or just am not properly cared for, my brain can't work properly, and I'm going to have increased anxiety and I'm going to feel really yucky. So those things I think are really important. And also, finally, I think the ability, especially now, to employ some dialectical thinking. So this can be extremely hard and frustrating. And for me to teach a fourth grader and a kindergartner at the same time is so challenging. And I have a teaching degree, so I'm in a better position than most. And I'm so glad that they're home with me. I love having the four of us under the same roof. I always say I have two hands. I can hold two things at the same time, and they're opposite. I mean, in a lot of ways they contradict each other, but I can be, really eager to get back out of the house and really nervous about how this is going to look. And so I think giving ourselves the permission as a means of self-care to say, I really want to do this craft project, but I'm not feeling like I have the bandwidth to do it. But that looks really good. I'm going to put it on my list for tomorrow. But I'm angry at this person who just shared it because they're acting like a better mom and now I'm feeling guilty. Giving ourselves some compassion, being gentle on ourselves, the way that you would want to say it to your best friend, try to say that to yourself.
I want to, Becca, I love what you said about the two hands. I'm going to steal that. I love what you said about self-compassion, and I want to sort of, and giving it to yourself. I think we just got the 5-minute warning for the panel piece. So I want to just throw out this question, and I'm going to answer it first, but I wanted to throw out the question to the two of you. If there's like one takeaway from today, like one thing that you would sort of want other people to take away from your experience and your story, what would it be? Something that can be used now. Like the one deep breath, right? So two pieces that I really want to bring up before I shut down my piece of today is, first of all, I want to be really clear that none of this comes naturally to me. And lots of times, particularly as a therapist who works with parents, where my clients largely, I always say to other therapists, like if your client can find it on the internet, then they assume that they know about it. So on the internet, you can find out that I have 2 kids. So I assume that my clients know I have 2 kids because they've heard me publicly or because they found it online. So they know that I'm a parent and they know that I'm experiencing things that are similar to what they're experiencing. And I try to be very transparent about the fact that just because I'm a therapist and in a position to sort of teach these skills doesn't mean that they come really naturally to me. I happen to be good at talking about them and I happen to be good at teaching them, and I'm getting better at using them because I practice them. But it's really important to be able to recognize that just because the 3 of us here are able to share this information doesn't mean that we're perfect at it all the time. It doesn't mean that it didn't take a lot of time and effort to learn. And so sometimes it can feel, really inspiring to leave these spaces and think like, wow, I can do that too. And then we fall into our normal lifestyles, and in like 3 hours, we're all going to be snapping at our kids because we've got to finish up work and start dinner. So in those moments, recognizing it's not that we've missed out on something or missed an opportunity to do better. It should be about, wait, I'm having a moment where I'm snapping. What did I hear earlier today that I can maybe employ and use a little bit? So I want to be really clear and upfront about that. That is certainly my experience. But I also wanted to share what I refer to as the mama bear voice, and this is specifically to the moms in our audience. But I talk with my clients a lot about the mama bear voice, because when we try to show ourselves compassion, and Becca's advice, like show yourself some compassion, give yourself some of that self-love, is such good advice. But again, it's hard to do. So lots of times I'll ask my clients, what would you say to your child if your child were in this circumstance? So imagine that it's your child who's struggling to navigate this problem, or your child who woke up from a scary thought in a nightmare, or your child is a 15-year-old who's having social trouble. What would you advise? How would you treat your child? Because as mothers, we become better at doing it for our kids. Mothers who are experiencing postpartum depression and anxiety often don't realize right away that they're having the symptoms, because they'll say, well, I'm doing such a good job taking care of the baby. The baby's needs are all met. I thought people with depression don't have the motivation to do that. Maybe I'm not depressed. So there's a lot of motivation in motherhood, intrinsic motivation, to follow through with the things that we think we need to and the things that we think we should or know we should and need to. So we're better at doing it for our kids. Using that voice, tuning into that part of yourself, can help you to do a better job of it for yourself. So that is my takeaway for today. And Liz and Becca, if you guys will share, and then I know we have some questions and answers.
Becca, please. You let me go left first, please.
It's funny because what I'm going to take is everything that you both said. And I think that you've given so many incredible kernels of wisdom and advice. And I love that. I welled up with tears when you said, treat yourself or talk to yourself the way you talk to your child, because I'm very hard on myself and I try not to be. And when I'm in these situations, I can preach all that I want and I can tell you exactly how that I am able to take care of myself or to speak to myself, but doing it is a whole other battle and it's very hard. And I welled up with tears thinking about talking to my daughter Belle, who just turned 10 on Saturday, and the voice that I want her to develop, her own internal monologue, and how I want her to feel about herself. So that's the most important thing that I can do. But in terms of something to take away from today, just because I don't want to like hammer this point home too hard, but what we are living through right now this would have been a very different discussion if this was occurring when we first signed on to do this, and when we first were asked to do this, when we were going to meet in person in King of Prussia and see each other and shake hands and all of this, which is not possible right now. But we're in the reality that we are in, and so sometimes just getting through each day can be a real accomplishment. And we are not, so when people say, how can I be a mom and a teacher and a chef and a referee and a wife and a fitness instructor and calm and feel loving and feel grateful? And the answer that I understand is we can't. Things are going to fall short. And that's why the rubric that Hillary put up was so essential. And just try to evaluate what are the things that are most important to you. And if you don't, will this matter? I like the advice. Will this matter in 5 minutes? Will this matter in 5 days? Will this matter in 5 years? I'm annoyed that the bed isn't made, but how much is this going to matter? No one else is going to see it. Maybe if you can put those things in somewhat of a hierarchy mentally, it can feel a little bit more manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me, a couple of things. One is super mom. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Hillary, that this concept of super mom that, sort of plagues our society. I think, I think challenging that and remembering that super mom doesn't exist. What is that? It's a cartoon, and cartoons aren't real. And so to make sure that, when we're sort of setting this bar for ourselves, are we setting it in a realistic, attainable place? I love what you said too about the self-talk. That is absolutely, I think, huge. And, as women, I think we do it without even realizing. We'll sprinkle it in throughout our day, and I can think of when I'm speaking to moms and they're saying, you know, I'm doing okay. And you mentioned, and you know, I'm doing okay, but you know, I'm failing. I feel like I'm failing, or, you know, I'm disappointing. I'm just sprinkled throughout as they're talking with us, and then, you know, making sure to stop and recognize what are the terms and the words we're using towards ourselves. And I think of verbal abuse, quite frankly, because, you know, verbal abuse, when we look at with a child, for instance, the danger, right, is that if something happens in our brains where that child then suddenly hears negative things about themselves and then starts to believe it. So just really watching what we're saying to ourselves. I love what you said about the mama bear voice, and Becca, you mentioned to the best friend. That's absolutely something we talk about often. Think about, you know, what would you say to your best friend? And then, why are you being so hard on yourself? We all do this, by the way. And that's another thing that I love what you said, that, you know, we may be the experts. And Becca, no way, I heard you say, I'm just, absolutely not. We're all in this together. And by the way, none of us know what we're doing when it comes to parenting. We're doing the best we can, right? And the best I think we can do is we then recognize that we've, made the wrong decision. We get the information, we try another decision. Keep it going, wrong decision, and off we go. And finally, I'll just say that for me, with what is very helpful in my own mindfulness practice, which, by the way, this is something I've been at for a very long time, and I struggle with it every day myself, simply because of the way our brains work, right? Our brains wander, our brains fill in the gaps, they add information. It's our brain doing its job. But for me, Tara Brach, who's a mindfulness teacher, talks a lot about the Buddhist simile concept of our thoughts as a waterfall. So in my mind, I encourage folks to think about the most beautiful waterfall you can imagine. And that water is coming down, and we want to be in the spot just behind the water. So the water is behind, you know, in front of us, I'm behind it, and my thoughts are that water. So I can watch them without going into the water and getting plummeted. I can just watch them. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I've never heard the waterfall before. That's awesome. So I think that, I mean, I know that we're moving to question and answers, but if I can just kind of like just a takeaway that I hear from both of you speaking, and this is something that I believe so strongly, and is that this idea that we're raising children who will become people, who are becoming humans. And so Becca, to your point, like to be raising your children with the kind of inner dialogue that you want them to have as people is really, it's helpful to think about. It's helpful to look at even your babies. Sometimes I'll look at babies with moms and I'll say, look at your baby. One day this will be a grown-up. What kind of grown-up do you want to make? And it's so important for grown-ups to recognize that none of us should strive to be perfect. We should strive to be working hard. We should strive to have effort. We should strive to be kind and gentle to others and ourselves. And that's kind of it. That's what makes the world a happier, safer, healthier, emotionally healthier place. So, if there's one sort of piece to take away, I think the common thread that I hear among all of our stories is to really be kind to yourself, using self-compassion and using compassion that you would use for others for yourself. So Nicole, how do we do the Q&A here? Do you want to?
Yes, so I see a question already, and I'd like to encourage other people to keep submitting their questions now. The first one, and I think Hillary, you did touch on this a little bit about the length of time that someone could experience postpartum, but the question is postpartum age related?
So I think about postpartum physically as during pregnancy and the first year postpartum. That's like what your OBGYN would say, for example. But emotionally, can we develop postpartum depression beyond that particular spectrum, that particular time frame? We would say clinically, yes. Becca mentioned earlier, the features of postpartum depression, anxiety, or mood disorders are very similar to what you see in major depression or generalized anxiety. They're complicated because of the focus and the presence of the baby and the changes to the family system.
Okay, and as other questions come in, it was really important for the Society of Professional Women to address this topic, and we all talked about this when we were talking about what we were going to come up with. We talked about the fact that a lot of people are co-parenting and that it is a very difficult topic for men to bring up at work. And we do have a lot of men that attend our SPW events, so I don't want to not include them in this conversation and how they could bring this topic up, almost like the same elevator speech that we talked about, just asking and stating your needs, but how not to have that stigma in your workplace and how to address that men are parents too. Can someone talk to that a little bit?
I'll quickly answer, and I'm curious to hear, Becca and Liz, what you have to add also, but everything that I am describing is applicable for men. And we could have like hours and hours of other opportunities to talk about specifically how is the experience different for men, what is the different stigma for men, but the tools are all the same. The tools to decrease your distress, cope with your anxiety, advocate for yourself in the workplace is all the same. And obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, for men or for partners who haven't given birth, and so that may mean adoptive parents, it can mean same-sex couples where one partner isn't the partner who's actually been the birth parent. It's more complicated because there's sort of a disentitlement to some of these symptoms. The idea, well, I'm not the one who had the baby, I didn't carry the baby, I'm not postpartum, so why am I depressed or anxious? You sort of don't feel entitled to be able to ask for these kinds of mental health supports and accommodations. So I really want to debunk that myth because only a portion of what we see in perinatal mood and anxiety is related to the genetics and the biology of actually having been pregnant and giving birth. So everything applies. And if there are specific questions and answers, that's when to reach out to someone for some, one-on-one or more specialized communication about it. You guys have anything to add? I talked longer than I.
That was beautifully said. Yes. Absolutely.
And right now, there's a lot going on with social media where, and I'm guilty of it myself, you're posting the awesome teacher day and the work day. And I think there's a perception of mostly positivity online where not many people divulge the struggles that they're having, which is why a stigma is created. Are there some words of encouragement or advice that you would all share in trying to break down those walls and being a little bit more authentic in experiences so that it is more acceptable in the workplace to have a bad day?
I think if I may, I think that you're hitting on an important theme in our work. Social media, there even, before this quarantine, there's so many positives to it, of course, and the internet. But there are a lot of things we have to be careful of too on social media, right? And again, I think as all humans, but especially as women, we can tend to really compare ourselves to what we see online. And I do, hear that often from women. I feel like I'm falling apart and everybody looks so terrific online. And, did you see this? Look, my best friend, she's at the grocery store, look at, or whatever. Her kids are sitting so patiently and quietly in this picture, kind of thing. And, I just go to sort of being careful when we're scrolling to be mindful about it, to remember that a photograph doesn't really tell us much of anything. And the best, I think, example I have of that is a project that Catherine Stone at Postpartum Progress put together many years ago that you can certainly Google and find. And I have the title here. You can't tell mom has postpartum depression by looking. And it's one of my favorite pieces. It is incredibly powerful. They asked for women to submit photographs of themselves as they were dealing with postpartum depression with the caption, when this photo was taken, I was. And these gorgeous, beautiful pictures of moms and families at the beach and in the pumpkin patch and big smiles and, really difficult captions. When this photo was taken, I had just come from the emergency room suffering a panic attack. I had just attempted suicide. I had just, all these very difficult things that looking at these photos, you would say, oh my goodness, it doesn't match, right? So, using that, I keep copies of that in my office, using that as a reminder for all of us, that we're all dealing with something. So to watch those comparisons.
I think if it's okay for me to jump in for a second, I have a somewhat complicated relationship with social media as well, because I love it. And I became a blogger 2 months after I became a mother because, long story short, I didn't have any friends who had babies yet, and it was 2010, and it was kind of the mommy blog thing was just starting. I barely knew what a blog was, but I wanted to share very openly and honestly what motherhood was like. And again, it's a lot of that dialectical thinking, because for me, there were two archetypes that I could find out about. The perfect mother who looked put together all the time and was extremely an amazing chef and all organic, and the babies were doing, this is before baby-led weaning even was something I knew about, but it was just this aspirational, perfect parent. Or the mother who is snarky and like, I hate my kids, give me the wine. And I couldn't relate to either of those archetypes wholly. There were parts of each that I could relate to. I pureed my own baby food, and I thought it was really hard having a child. I had dance parties in tutus, and I thought I was exhausted and it would never end. So for me, I wanted to talk honestly about how you can be in love with your children and be obsessed with them and be enchanted and struggle. So that was incredibly important to me. So I had a blog for 10 years. And if you go on the blog, the most recent post, I kind of shudder to think, is about how the top 5 tips I have for being stuck in the house. Because I had actually been stuck for a couple extra weeks. My kids were sick before all of this. And I tried to give advice that was very, very approachable, like do the best that you can. And if that's just jumping up and down in a circle and stomping your feet, that's good. That's more than enough. So it's very compassionate, but it is overwhelming. And just my advice is this. Think about when you take a picture and you say, let me see it. Let me take another one. And you end up with 12 pictures and you pick the best of the bunch, and then you put it through a filter. And sometimes you put it through another filter and you ask somebody what you think and you do your best. The other photos that are on the cutting room floor are much more realistic, and everyone has them. Everyone. Most people don't post the worst photo of the bunch. Most people don't post when their house is a mess, when they're feeling really bad about themselves, when they're having a day where they're like, oh, I look gross, I feel gross, I'm a failure. It's not the day when you post most often. So when you look, you're looking at a carefully curated best of highlights reel of someone's life. That's what you're seeing in general. And if you also have a complicated relationship with social media, let's say Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is, take stock of how you feel. If you're feeling really not good after you scroll through, maybe you should step back. And if it's hard because it's become a habit for you, something I did was I put the Instagram app on a separate page in my phone in a folder, hidden, because it takes me a couple extra steps to go into it. And sometimes it helps me to catch myself and say, I don't need to go mindlessly scroll through Instagram right now. I'm going to just go read my book, or like read a book, or do something else. Again, that is not something that I do with ease or perfectly, but if you can just remember, and people say it all the time, but I'm sure at least for everyone here, there's at least one person they know who they see pictures of looking beautiful and perfect and know something very personal about them and how those two things conflict dramatically. And then that's a good reminder to say, okay, this is not all what it seems. The wizard is behind the curtain and does not look like the great and powerful Oz.
That's amazing. I love everything you just said. Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise with us today and personal stories. I know it's a sensitive topic, but it's a very important conversation, and we're very grateful for your time and your knowledge. Are there any last thoughts, words of wisdom you'd like to part with today before saying goodbye to everyone that any of you would like to share? No?
I just think
Okay,
kindness.
I love being, I'll close it out. I can't ever help myself. I really, really, really love what I do so passionately, because I just think it's pretty awesome to be, to be someone who has the ability to connect with other women in this way. I find it so empowering to be in a role where I can sort of think about my strengths, my challenges, the ways that I feel successful, the ways that I might not be successful. I find it empowering to be able to look at myself sort of objectively and from a thoughtful perspective. It helps me to avoid the self-judgment and the self-critique. And so when I can sort of be in a space, like I'm looking at Becca and Liz on my screen, and I'm feeling, and Nicole, and I'm feeling like sad that we're not all together, to be in this like woman power space a little bit, because it feels very empowering to create these spaces where we can take real good hard looks at ourselves and say, I am really successful in these ways. I am really challenged in these ways. And these are the ways that we grow. Like that to me is awesome. So I thank you, Nicole, so much for this opportunity, and I'm so glad to see the other faces here today.
Thank you all
Absolutely
so
agree.
much. So thank you so much for your time. Like I said, we really appreciated hearing from all of you. I'd like to remind anyone who is interested to sign up for our next SPW event, which is on May 21st. It's with Kimberly Ramallo, who is the Vice President, Communications and Public Affairs at Lockheed Martin Rotary and Mission Systems, on accessing gender equality in the workplace. And this will actually be an interview with Emmy Award-winning career broadcast journalist Monique Braxton. So you could sign up for that at spwmainline.com. I believe it's going to be a virtual event at this time anyway, but we'll always keep you updated on any of the changes. I want to thank you all again on behalf of everyone at the Chamber. We are so appreciative for the time that you invested to stay connected and be interactive with us. We need you just as much as you need us, so we're here to serve you. You can reach out to any of our Chamber staff members that are working virtually if you need help or would like to get more involved with any of our programs. Thank you again to our panel, and we wish you well and hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen one more time to thank our sponsors. Like I said, it will not be, we would not be able to have gone virtual if it was not for their continued support. So I want to thank them all very much for their support of this program as always. So thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll all be together in person soon. Thank you guys so much for today.